Guitar Hero, the BlackBerry, Napster, and iTunes, some of the most iconic things from the 2000s are already obsolete, if not gone completely. See which innovative ideas and products from the 2000s you remember and which ones you actually miss today. Flip phones and AOL, the new digital age. Okay, the internet age technically started in the 90s, but let's not kid ourselves, it wasn't until the 2000s when average folks started buying PCs and desktops for the sole purpose of hopping online and surfing the net. The internet brought us one step closer to what we know of today as the digital age, and a world of new possibilities when it came to communication. One of the first ways to do some online chatting came in the form of instant messaging, a form of computer texting, with America Online, or AOL, offering up their popular AIM AOL Instant Messenger service. AIM was the ultimate chat platform for teens, long before social media. But you know how this story ends up. AIM and AOL became obsolete with the arrival of social media sites such as MySpace. MySpace was one of the original social media sites, and in its day, the most popular by far. However, other sites like Facebook, Twitter or X, Instagram, and the global monster that is TikTok made the once dominant MySpace into nothing more than a digital graveyard. R.I.P. Tom. Of course, it wasn't all about PC communication for those who lived back during the digital Stone Age, as there were cell phones. But cell phones in the 2000s bear little resemblance to the portable PCs that are the modern smartphone. Back in the 2000s, the flip phone was revolutionary. Flip phones, such as the Motorola Razr, not only allowed you to chat on the go, but you could also text, albeit on a numeric keyboard, which required some skill compared to texting on today's full keyboards. You could also customize your flip by purchasing a ringtone. How could it get better than that? Well, it obviously did. Today's smartphone compared to a 2000s flip is like comparing an old-school calculator to an iMac. Though smartphones did start to emerge in the 2000s, with the most popular at the time being the BlackBerry. However, the BlackBerry was turned into jelly when the iPhone and Samsung Galaxy burst onto the scene. Napster and digital cameras, 2000s tech. The early digital age introduced loads of new technology, with entertainment tech being at the very top. No surprise there. Going back to computers and the internet, streaming was still on the horizon, and downloading was what everyone was doing online, as the transition from CDs and tapes was in full swing. Music was now going online, and the new format of choice was the MP3. And to get the latest MP3s, most folks headed over to Napster or LimeWire, the two most popular peer-to-peer file-sharing sites on the early internet. Unfortunately, these sites were ethically questionable and, illegal due to copyright issues. This fact, along with the arrival of streaming services, made peer-to-peer downloading sites a thing of the past. Staying on the topic of music, those mostly illegal downloads had to be played on something. And with flip phones lacking the ability to play music, folks in the 2000s headed to their local Radio Shack or other electronics store to purchase a device called an MP3 player. The MP3 player put a gigantic library of music in the palm of your hands. Much like today, Apple shot to the top of the technology hill with the iPod, with a storage capacity that made most other MP3 players obsolete. Camcorders and digital cameras were also a huge part of 2000s life. Camcorders had been around for years before, but the decade introduced the public to smaller, sleeker camcorders that could rest comfortably in one hand. Lightweight and with a crystal clear picture, camcorders in the 2000s even had display screens so you could see everything you were filming without having to stick your eye in the viewfinder. When it came to still photography, digital cameras were new, high-tech, and made film useless. These cameras allowed users to bypass the middlemen of the photography world like Kodak and Photomat and upload their photos directly onto their computer. Today, of course, smartphones have made MP3 players, camcorders, and digital cameras obsolete in the same way those devices made the old-school VHS camcorders and film cameras disappear before them. Step out of the 2000s for a second to hit that like button. Every thumbs up matters, and we appreciate the encouragement from all our viewers. Thanks. Now, let's get back into it. Guitar Hero, iTunes, and DVDs by mail. Keeping yourself entertained in the 2000s was pretty much the same as today. Granted, the options we enjoy today are overwhelming compared to 2 decades ago, but the basics behind entertainment are still the same. Music, movies, and video games were all the names of the game when it came to keeping boredom at bay. Before the arrival of Apple Music and Spotify, music lovers would go online and head over to iTunes to buy their music, usually costing 99 cents for a single track. Today, the streaming services have eliminated the need to buy tracks, with just about every song on the planet now available for a small fee. For a fee, anyway. When it came to movies back in the 2000s, folks didn't have to look any further than Netflix. However, the Netflix of the 2000s was nothing like the one we all know and love today. Since streaming was still years in the future, the original Netflix was a DVD-based rental service by mail. Today, Netflix is the streaming service powerhouse that basically set the whole move to streaming in motion, rendering the mailing of physical copies of a movie obsolete. The 2000s also saw the highest and lowest points for Blockbuster. At the beginning of the millennium, Friday night trips to Blockbuster to rent movies was a regular event. But by the end of the decade, the company filed for bankruptcy protection, eventually closing for good. The move to streaming also made purchasing things like DVD box sets pointless, as logging into Netflix or any of the countless services now available gives you access to complete seasons of popular shows and full sequel sets of famous movies. Now, when it came to gaming of the day, it was all about the latest video games and consoles. Gaming has always been filled with gimmicks, usually in the form of peripherals like the Power Glove or the Wii Remote. But in the 2000s, there was no gimmick more popular than Guitar Hero. Turning your living room into a live concert, Guitar Hero was the game that crossed karaoke with air guitar. The result was a fantasy game that let you live out your fantasy of being a rock guitar god. Eventually, Guitar Hero was joined by Rock Band, which upped the ante and added the entire band into the mix. Sadly, the novelty of these peripheral games wore off, and both Guitar Hero and Rock Band became as obsolete as a Vanilla Ice cassette tape, with millions of plastic guitars, drums, and microphones all ending up in yard sales and landfills across the country. Top toys and games. Keeping on the 2000s video game topic, all the popular console brands known to gamers today were accounted for, with portable gaming consoles being the latest and heavily in demand at the time. The Game Boy Advance was one of the first Y2K portable systems to arrive on the gaming scene in 2001. With a history that went back to the late 80s, the Game Boy was already the established leader in portable gaming. However, the Game Boy Advance was everything Nintendo fans loved about the original, but it introduced 32-bit gameplay. Unfortunately for the Game Boy Advance, other portable systems like the PlayStation Vita, Nintendo's own Switch, and even smartphones have made the GBA pointless. But there's more to life than video games, and kids of the 2000s had lots of toys and gadgets to choose from. Toys like Beyblades, the Japanese spinning top game, first popped up on store shelves and finally in toy lovers' hands in late 1999, but really caught fire in late 2008. The toy had a large fan base, and while still around today, has since dwindled significantly. A few other popular toys of the era were Hit Clips and Bratz dolls. Hit Clips was a kind of alternative to the MP3 player. The digital audio device developed by Tiger Electronics, the company that's best known for Furby, but also produced those cheap handheld video game systems that flooded every supermarket and department store shelf for around 2 decades. Yeah, those guys. Anyway, the device played small cartridges that played 1-minute music clips, eventually moving to 2-minute clips. Kind of an audio YouTube short or audio TikTok clip long before those were a thing. Hit clips eventually became obsolete when streaming hit the scene, and the era of the 1 or 2 minute song clip was as extinct as the dodo. And now for Bratz. The early 2000s fashion doll was like Barbie, but more cartoon-like and with way more attitude. These dolls were an instant hit, and the line managed to reach sales of over $1 billion at its peak. However, Bratz are no longer the mega hit they once were, despite the line's brief comeback. Ugh, fashion in the 2000s. While fashion is always going in and out of style, let's take a look at some of the biggest fashion trends of the 2000s. When it came to jeans, low-rise was the way to go. Resting low on the hips, a pair of low-rise jeans complete with flared bottoms were everywhere in the 2000s. Today, jeans tend to rest higher on the midsection, and those flares are long gone, being ousted by skinny jeans and eventually the more relaxed fit teens usually sport now. If you weren't a jeans person, or you were just in the mood for something a bit more comfortable, then velour tracksuits, made popular by the likes of Missy Elliott, were likely what you'd slip into before heading out. And the most popular brand was Juicy Couture. While the brand is still around today, their velvet-like tracksuits were left back in the 2000s with the Backstreet Boys, 98 Degrees, and NSYNC. Of course, we can't forget about footwear, and if anything screamed 2000s footwear, it was Uggs. Ugg boots were everywhere in the 2000s. The boot that looks more like a slipper than a pair of fashionable footwear was developed in Australia and made waves all over the US and just about everywhere else. Ugg's popularity fizzled out, until recently, as today's teens have discovered the boot and they're starting to make a comeback, much like Air Force Ones, another popular 2000s shoe. Oh, and don't forget to grab your trucker hat before you head out. Yes, trucker hats were a big deal in the 2000s, until folks got tired of wearing the novelty hat tilted slightly to the side and put these hats away for good. Other long-gone tech. Filming a video whenever you want has become as simple as reaching for your cell and hitting record. Oh, and don't forget to post it to social media. But back in the 2000s, things weren't nearly as convenient. Of course, folks had the ability to film whatever it was that caught their eye, but they had to use the tech available at the time, like flip video cameras. These cameras were small, simple, and could only record quick videos. Of course, there was no place to post that video, so hang on to that gem for at least a couple years. We touched on the subject of MP3 tech, with iPods being the pinnacle, but those nifty devices also came with wonderful little peripherals like the iPod dock. Sometimes you're in no mood to head out with your music in hand and just want to listen to your iTunes at home, and that's where the iPod dock came in. This device was basically a set of speakers that let you dock your iPod and listen to your music at home. Today, we have a truckload of Bluetooth speakers that do the job. Now, let's talk about traveling during the 2000s. Do you remember paper boarding passes? Maybe, but chances are you haven't seen one recently. And to be honest, that goes for a lot of paper products today. However, back in the 2000s, paper boarding passes were the only option for travelers, as digital technology was still in its infancy. Today, on the other hand, folks use digital passes to travel, tap our smartphones to pay for things, and online delivery service apps to order dinner. Technology is always evolving with every passing year, and there's no doubt that 20 years from now, future folks will be shocked by our current technology and how obsolete and primitive it has become. We've got more great videos that span across decades. Get your nostalgic fix with a modern twist and stay right here to keep watching another Now and Then video.